And when we speak of civil liberties and civil rights, people are beginning to understand that the most fundamental of these is the right to work in our society. And what is occurring in Guyana is that the government is making political capital out of the indefensible position of one who is either unemployed or is very close to the line of being unemployed.
I want to say to you all, in no uncertain terms, that this government is disrespectful to black people. And if people disrespect you, you have a right to disrespect them.
I am saying now that we have started, now that we have come together, do not sleep. Don't let us go back quietly into the night. Protest must be the order of the day.
Lie, 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 lie. People always talking, but plenty of them don't know, and that is why they always criticizing the true giants of Kaiso. But like they forgetting the old pretty summer great Kaisos I sang universally. In New York they start the Hall of Fame, but they couldn't leave out the great pretender's name. I've been singing Kaiso from a little boy since 1929. Always have proper lyrics and don't talk about sweet music. Good rendition, rhythm and rhyme. And year after year, pretty always there. The facts you can't ignore. I am very sure they don't make them like me anymore. Lie, let it. When I jump in the ring, boy, I first them fellas could I really sing. Them was the mouthpiece, the chronicle, always defending the rights of poor people. Oh yes, we breakaway and let go, but they used to sing things that people should know. We didn't have no records or radio. Is you had to prove yourself singing Kaiso. Men like Douglas Lyon Attila, Radio Brawler Beginner, Caressa and the Great Executor, Muncie Daly Albany, King Ivory Normandy, Mentor and Modern Inventor, Tiger Unknown and Invader, Unknown Soldier and Rascasa, Destroyer and the Great Kitchener. But as I said before, they don't make them like me anymore. This is something you ought to know. It's over 6 decades I sing in Kaiso. They change up Kaiso in all form and fashion, but I still remain a true Kaisonian. Oh yes, I love me soca and up tempo, but me in lane go true Kaiso. I want you to keep these names in your head. Some good Calypsonians, both living or dead. Viking Zebra, Mighty Killer, Melody, Terror, the great spoiler, Striker, Ziegfeld, and Conqueror. Superior, Cypher, the great sparrow, Blakey, Briner, Puma Cristo, Shorty, Duke Rose, and Valentino. Sniper, Relator, Explain, Abrigo, Funny Francine, Gypsy, and Maestro, Stalin, Chalk Dust, Shadow, Swallow, Composer, Engine, and Power, I can't ignore, but they don't make them like me anymore. Now everywhere I go, people want to know what could really happen to Kaiso. I told them that I may be dead and gone, but sweet soak and Kaiso bound to live on. When somehow we big boys get wiped off the map, there are plenty good young singers to fill the gap. So who hear the name? I hope they ain't ball. It's too much of good Kaisonian to call like Tambu Baran, David Rodder, Roosman Screnter, Dennis Plummer, Shualos, Merchant Luther Crow, Johnny King, Crazy All Rounder, Posa Bali Pink Panther, Little Natasha, Marshall Montano. Ebony Contender, the Labo, Super Blue Protector, the Fosto, Watchman GB, Rio Alberto, Kenny J. Lady B, and Islin all. But they don't make them like me anymore.
This is the most potent homemade manjaro the internet has ever seen. I mix these 4 ingredients that are 10.
Friends, I was bound to come back because I heard the tumultuous rounds of applause. It's very gratifying to know you appreciate pretty Kaiso. I love to sing for people with intelligence. And you are such a beautiful audience. Believe me, friend, this ain't old talk. I love the Calypso fans in New York.
The great pretender.
Friends, I know you love to hear pretty singing extemporaneously. A lot of giant singers coming behind. Me want nobody keep me in mind. They have composer and terror. Boomer, don't forget relator. Me don't want them fellas complain. So if you call me, I ain't coming back. Striker, Ziegfeld, and Conqueror. Superior, Cypher, the great sparrow, Blakey, Briner, Puma Cristo, Shorty, Duke Rose, and Valentino. Sniper, Relator, Explain, Abrigo, Funny Francine, Gypsy, and Maestro, Stalin, Chalk Dust, Shadow, Swallow, Composer, Engine, and Power, I can't ignore, but they don't make them like me anymore. everywhere I go, people want to know what go really happen to Kaiso. I told them that I may be dead and gone, but sweet soak and Kaiso bound to live on. When some of we big boys get wiped off the map, there are plenty good young singers to fill the gap. So who hear the name? I hope they ain't ball. It's so much of good Kaisonian to call like Tambu Baran, David Rodder, Roosman Scranton, Dennis Plummer, Shualos, Merchant Luther Crow, Johnny King, Crazy All Rounder, Hosa Bali Pink Panther, Little Natasha, Marshall Montano. Ebony contender the Labo, Super Blue Protector the Fosto, Watchman GB, Rio Alberto, Kenny J Lady B, and Islin all. But they don't think them like me anymore. Friends, I was bound to come back because I heard the tumultuous rounds of applause. It's very gratifying to know you appreciate reading Kaiso. I love to sing for people with intelligence. And you are such a beautiful audience. Believe me, friend, this ain't old talk. I love the Calypso fans in New York.
The great pretender.
Friends, I know you love to hear Brady singing extemporaneously. A lot of giant singers coming behind. Me want nobody keep me in mind. They have composer and terror. Boomer, don't forget relator. Me don't want them fellas complain. So if you call me, I ain't coming.
Free me, pretender.
Friends, as are true to Kai's Union, I must thank you for your acclamation. Your acknowledgement gives me the inspiration to sing this extempo composition. But my performance, I'll have to curtail. I hope that you would let good sense prevail. Make all your friends to know you met the Michael Jordan of Kaiser. Friends, as are true to Kai's Union, I must thank you for your acclamation. Your acknowledgement gives me the inspiration to sing this extempo composition. but my performance I'll have to curtail. I hope that you would let good sense prevail. Make all your friends to know you met the Michael Jordan of kind.
The great Lord Pretender. Lord Pretender. Oh my, they don't make them like that anymore. Definitely they don't make them like that anymore. Lord Pretender, the king of extempo. It's a genre of calypso where you just come on stage, they give you a topic, and you sing on that topic extemporaneously. And Pretty Lord Pretender is the greatest of them all. You have people like Gypsy, who is arguably up there with Pretender. You have London, Young London, who is ruling the roost now. But extempo is a particular type of calypso. Really calls for knowledge, intelligence, putting words together on the spot. And that is why I believe that calypso is the greatest musical genre in modern society. It's there's not a music like it. I mean, there are tremendous musical forms by all groups in the history of humanity, but the kaiso is particular. As I tell my students all the time, is that we in the Caribbean are probably the only people in the world who dance to politics and philosophy. And as you listen to Lord Pretender there, you understand the real authenticity of the music storytelling. And as the Mighty Joke says, editorial in song, editorial in song. Good evening to all of you, and welcome to Politics 101. Tonight it's Monday night, and we have Tacuma Ogunseye in the house, and we are going to be talking about the issues over the last week. And you know, there is never a dull moment in Guyanese politics. Never a dull moment in Guyanese politics. Good evening to you. Good afternoon to you. Good night to you. All those of you who are joining us. A very good evening to the people on the East Bank of Demerara. The East Bank is coming under the microscope for reasons other than what those people represent. Of course, you know, the East Bank Road is forever congested, especially as you get down to a place like Grove. When you're coming down from the airport, you get to Grove, and then it's trouble after then with all the construction that's going on, but not just the construction, but the way in which the construction workers don't necessarily care about all the traffic jam and all that kind of stuff. And the vice president has been trying to flay them, but at the end of the day, no, you can't blame them. It is the government. The government seem to be more concerned about remaining in power rather than doing what is right. Good evening to Vibert, my friend there from Grove. Good evening to the wonderful people at Linden. And I'm told that I have to be specific sometimes when I talk about Linden. Good evening to Wisma, Mackenzie, Amelia's ward, 1 mile, half mile. And as my friend Dr. Vincent Adams would say, Christian Borg. All the wonderful people at Linden, good evening to you. And it's a new week and we're ready to roll. My friend Cyril Walker, good evening, my brother. Linda Mingo, good evening. Good evening to Dennis Collison, always present, always a fighter. Joma and Kruma, always here. Jomo, that name, I grew up as a little boy in Buxton and we had 2 Larry. Now I hear they're calling it Cantor. We had 2 Larry. One name was Jomo Kenyatta and the other one was Sir Abu Bakar. You talk about people who had a sense of identity and a sense of self, Jomo Kenyatta and Abu Bakar. To this day, Bakar, Mr. Andres, all his children and grandchildren and them get a name Bakar. I don't think if some of the young people, some of the younger members of the family might even know where Bakar come from. But it was his Larry, Mr. Andres, Ayaman and Kudu and them, their father truck. Abu Bakar. And then about 3 houses down, Scarface. His Larry was Jomo Kenyatta. Sir Abu Bakar, of course, was from Nigeria, and Jomo Kenyatta, the burning spear from Kenya. Good evening to all of you and welcome. Good evening to you, Cheryl. Good evening to you, Carlisle. I see my sister on this evening, Donna Jonas, who is Donna is Linden via Buxton and Firish. The father was from Firish and mother from Buxton, the Moffatts. And what mixture of blood to have in you? Irish blood and Buxton blood. Good evening. I had a chance to talk with some people there in Irish, Cortland, Gibraltar area. Things not regular there in the quarantine. They're busy doing slave catching up there in the quarantine, that part of the quarantine, because when you left Irish, Gibraltar, Cortland, you're not meeting any African community until you get past Rosal and Port Morant. And I'm told that whole stretch there, you have one black business, which is owned by a son of Irish, Cortland, Gibraltar, and that is Benjamin. Benjamin, who was the baker shop in Buxton. He has a business there, one black business, I'm told, in that whole stretch, 14 miles from Irish, Gibraltar, up to Rosal, and then you move on to Port Morant. And then when you pass there, of course, then you go on to Kildonan and Norney and Alness and those African villages or mixed villages. But it's quite a thing there. And we understand that what they're doing is that they're going around to these communities and registering people as if they're registering them to vote. And then they give them the red PPP jersey. And then when the people open the jersey, they see $35,000 inside. 2 days later, the PPP man come back and say, you get the thing? Yes, what thing you're talking about? The $35,000. Yeah. But what we need you to do is sign up to be a PPP member, to vote for the PPP. That is happening there in Gibraltar, Cortland, Firish area right now as we speak. One man had the courage to give them back their $35,000 and said, no, I'm not selling my vote. I'm not selling my vote. Kudos to that gentleman. And so we have work to do. We have work to do. A lot of people ignored our message and run off on their own narrative that we are angry about people joining the PPP and all that nonsense, and we use bad word and all those kinds of things. The real issue is what is going on in our communities. What is going on in our communities? It's buying votes, which is terrible. It's against the spirit of our Constitution. But more than that, it's the I-Pass. I-Pass for African people. All people of all other ethnicities, Indians, Portuguese, are trying to tell black people what is good for them and trying to say to them, you want money. You know, it is consistent with the whole notion of hungry belly, so you need money for buying food. That is all you're worth. And so when you're talking about racism, that is racism. That is racism. The way in which you characterize and essentialize a particular ethnic group. Very disrespectful. You're telling them that what you need is a little frick. You're telling them, don't worry with Norton, don't worry with David Hines, don't worry with Nigel Hughes. They're not your leaders. What they ever do for you. What they ever do for you. So we are the only people you have to do something for. You know, we are always looking out. You know? And that is the racism. That is what the ERC should be looking into. Not looking into me. Abusing out and stopping the vote catchers, the vote buyers and slave catchers in their tracks. Good evening to all of you. Good evening to you, Troy. Good evening to you, Mary Figueroa. Always present, always present. Donna Liverpool, I think Donna is coming from French Guyana or Dutch Guyana. I think she's somewhere over there. You all know my age. You all say Suriname or Paramaribo and Cayenne. Well, my generation knew it. Dutch Guyana, French Guyana. You know, we had some people who came, I think they're originally Guyanese, but the father was from Suriname, lived in Buxton, and we used to call them Dutchie. And to this day, that name, them Dutchie. Them Dutchie, you know, from Dutch Guyana. Good evening and welcome to Politics 101. Please share the link. Please share the link. Share the link and let everyone know that we are live tonight. Tacuma Ogunseye, a co-leader of the Working People's Alliance and veteran political activist, is in the house. And note I say political activist and not politician. A politician is someone who makes their living off politics. Someone who makes their living off politics. I don't make my living off politics. Tacuma Ogunseye doesn't make his living off politics. We are political activists, revolutionary political activists. Good evening to all of you. French Guyana, yes, French Guyana, Cayenne. Intertwined, our people are. And as Pretender said, they don't make them like him anymore. And it's not just in Kaiso. It's in almost every facet of life. Things come into being and go out of being. We're grappling with the present, but if must we grapple with the present, we cannot do so outside of the context of the past. And if we tell lies on the past, then we are telling lies on the present, and we are misleading our people as far as the future of our country is concerned. Well, you all have noticed that Venezuela is at it again. Venezuela is at it again. We're going to be talking about that and much more. I think we are ready for Brother Tacuma. Tacuma, good evening.
Hi, good evening, Dr. Hines, and good evening to your viewers.
It's always a pleasure to have you on and to be able to get some wisdom from you. I depend on you a lot as far as the pulse of people are concerned, because you were someone who walked the road, ride the road. You're always out there. You're a market vendor and tradesman. You're a tradesman, and by tradesman I mean you're a man who walk with your hands, and you're a market vendor. So you're constantly seeing and hearing from people, and so your perspective on a lot of these political matters are valued. Let us start with the issue that I was talking about there. I got a couple of calls from the quarantine asking myself and the WPA to visit there. In particular, we got calls from Firish, Gibraltar, Cortland area, and they're complaining about the attempts there at slave catching and the way in which the PPP is going about it. Are you surprised that in those far-flung areas where the media are not shining their cameras very often, that you have that kind of behavior going on?
No, I'm not surprised. I mean, that is consistent with the PPP playbook. They have mastered the art of breaking up the country into small parts, particularly the African community, and to see where they could find community to isolate and give special attention. One of the big classical things for that was Linden, the way they treat Linden. With the TV station, they kept Linden for umpteen years without access to the general national TV stations, and had them confined to one station controlled by the government and pushing government propaganda. And that you could say was the beginning of their approach after they came to power in 1992. So it is not surprising that now that there are problems with the changing demographics in the country, and more importantly, with the fact that they have engaged in a governance style that is very much apartheid type, and the African community and their activists and leadership have been raising these matters in the halls of the United Nations under this special period in which the United Nations designate for African people, the decade for African people. And the PPP's racism has been stripped and made naked to the world. And then they make things worse when they went to United Nations Committee and argue that the African economic and social conditions at present is a reflection of the fact they engage in not planting rice, instead they plant provisions to eat, and it's amongst the self-imposed wounds. I mean, that is open racism. And I think that having faced both the national, regional, and international pushback, and having come under the spectacles of the world, I think they decided that they have to do some repair work. And the repair work is not, in my judgment, is not so much for elections, but to counter the kind of pressure they're under for the racial policies and governance. And they feel the only way to put some cover over that is to see if they can mobilize sections of the African community on PPP platforms and show them to the world. So they see that it's a massive program of window dressing. And that is the contempt they have for us. They see us as commodities that could be bought and sold, and not simply for elections. Because I don't think the PPP is that stupid that they're depending upon African votes to win the elections. They're not. They've worked out how they're going to prevail in the elections minus African votes. But they need the African cover for dealing with the racist allegations that have been made against them, which their governance make it difficult for them to agree for there to be objective international commission to investigate. Because any international commission come to investigate the conditions of Africans under the PPP government at present would expose the grim reality of the one-sidedness of the economic development in the country. So they can't walk down the road that an average government would have done under those pressures. So for them, the only lifeline is to have Africans who they catch in the slave catching activity and have them being paraded at the time of the elections, because elections time is a high point where the world will be looking at Guyana, and they feel that that will be the best time to have the showcase.
The best time to have the showcase. And you look at the state media, they do cash grants, and the people who they have, oh, thank God, thank the government for this cash grant. African people, they parade them. Whenever there's any parading, they're not parading Indian Guyanese, they're not parading Portuguese. A lot of times they don't get into the hinterland, so they can parade our indigenous brothers and sisters, but they're always parading Africans. And there was something called the United States has something called the World's Trade Festival. It was held in 1904 to mark the 100th anniversary of the Louisiana Purchase. That is the purchase of Louisiana and surrounding areas from the French. And what the Americans did, this was during the period of segregation, they had Native Indians. They had these booths with Native Indians. And then you had booths with Africans, and they're parading them in their natural thing. And white people would go next to them and measure their color against, let me see my color against the barbarians, and so forth. So this issue of parading people, parading Africans, parading Native Indians has a long history of humiliation of Africans. And these people in Guyana, they do exactly it. Whether they're aware of that history or they're not aware of that history, whether they're aware of the symbolism of parading Africans and parading Native Indians, I don't know. But they are engaged in the worst form of racism. And we live in a society, Brother OG, part of it don't have a sense of what racism is, because the PPP is socializing mainly the East Indian community, but it's also spilling over among Amerindians and Africans to believe racism is when somebody says, I love my race, or somebody said, I'm black. That is racism, rather than what they are doing, that parading in the newspaper of Africa. It's not like they're parading all races. They pull out Africans and they parade Africans. And that is the zenith of racism. Do you think they're conscious of what they're doing, or they're just doing it like that?
I think they're conscious, even if you want to give them the benefit of the doubt to say initially they weren't conscious. But they have been faced with the objective criticism by you and many other African activists and groups, so they can't now argue that they don't know. And instead of changing the policy, stopping the policy, they have been intensifying the policy. So the objective evidence will lead any impartial observer to the fact that this is deliberate behavior on the behalf of the PPP. They're not doing it out of ignorance. They're doing it very understanding exactly what they're doing. And I think it's a result of the contempt that they have for our people in our community. You see, unfortunately, in multi-ethnic societies like ours, when you have a historic kind of contestation like how we had, and then one ethnic group have been able to emerge as an economic powerhouse relative to the other group, what goes with that is a level of contempt. And when politics embrace that, and politics is using that to enhance political survival, it gets 1,000 times worse. And this is exactly what we have here. We have a conversion of the unfortunate development of contempt deriving out of economic success in the Indo-Guyanese community. And then you have the deliberate political embrace of that and to use it in their struggle to enhance the PPP political power. So you have those two things conversion, and their actions are very deliberate, very deliberate. You see, they since 92, people have been pointing out to them that the way in which they're dealing with state contracts, the state is the largest spender of funds in the economy. And if you got a procurement arrangements where 90% of the state contracts goes outside the African and Amerindian community, the majority goes in the Indian community and probably the Portuguese community to some extent. You're creating, economic deprivation in the African community. And then when you add to that a deliberate policy by the government to pauperize African workers who constitute the majority in the public sector by giving them starvation wages, denying them the right to collective bargaining, and so you're deliberately creating a situation of economic dependency in the African community. And I'm convinced it was as early as in the early 90s, they have worked out that the best way to deal with Africans is to keep them in economic difficulties, and then the PPP will offer them things, and the chances are you will have a significant numbers of the Africans, driven by economic deprivation, willing, to ease out of the PPP hands. And I think that that is the game plan very early, since after they came to power in 92. And I think that they've systematically, over the 22 years they went into office before they got defeated in 2015, that was the line of march. Create deliberate, economic difficulties in the African community, pauperize our community, and then they know very well a point will come where human beings going to place survival immediately as something more important than the political conviction. And I think that is the criminal nature of the mentality behind that kind of strategy.
Criminal nature. Brother Ogunseye, let us switch gears for a minute. I'm going to read part of the WPA press release this morning at the press conference and ask for your comments. WPA continues to believe that the gravity of the Venezuela threat seems not to be a priority for our government. This is a stubborn truth which must concern all Guyanese. Our government appears more intent on fighting wars with its domestic adversaries rather than mobilizing a national response to this clear and present danger. While the government is correct in moving to galvanize regional and international opinion on our side, one does not get the impression that there is a sense of urgency or an overall strategy. That is an excerpt from the WPA's press release, which was released at its press conference this morning. Expand on that and explain to us the thinking behind that position.
Okay, I think that the WPA's press release in that particular section highlights in a very graphic way the crisis that we have related to the border and a government that is bent, on domination. And it is best reflected in the initial responses of opposition supporters. Kaishur News, I think it was, yes, I think it's Kaishur News on Sunday, had on the front page a picture with President Ali meeting and shaking hands with the opposition leader, Aubrey Norton. And as soon as I hit the road, and it was both in Georgetown and the rural area, people see you say, Ogunseye. They know Norton now, and they're showing you the paper. They know Norton now, they know the opposition now. Opposition supporters were greatly offended by the fact that the government only knows the opposition when trouble, is in the air. And I think that in a real way is unfortunate, but that is the state of play we find ourselves in the country. And the WPA assessment of the government that they're not so interested in national cohesion as it relates to the border is borne out by the fact that they were dealing with this problem since 1992. Since 1992, the government, was dealing with the border problem, and they had umpteen opportunities to demonstrate to the country and the world that as it relates to the border, they are prepared to put aside internal political differences and to build, a real cohesive and united um, response, political response by the entire nation, reflected in government and opposition working together to deal with this matter. And I think that the WPS conclusion that the government is not interested genuinely in border solidarity from the opposition is bored out by the long years of the behavior on this matter. Now, the WPF called or reiterate a call we made when they had the Argyle Agreement. I think we made it at that point. We called for a border cabinet. I can't remember in the early time that is the term we use, but it's the same thing. We call it this time a border cabinet, involving the parliamentary political parties, civic society forces, expert in security, experts in diplomacy, so that we could have a national committee that is dealing with this matter 365 days a year, and not only when the Venezuela engage in some aggressive or provocative action, then we holding our heads and we screaming and we trying to get, a semblance of unity. And they have ignored that call, and I'm certain that they will ignore it again because that is in nature of them. But we have to do the right thing. We made a call. We have to fight for it, but we have to do it knowing very well who we're dealing with. And I'm convinced unless the Venezuelan troops begin to march, over, the ships and the planes, that's the only time the PPP probably will try to build some national cohesive response to that aggression. And more so since we are at present in election year. It is very doubtful, given the PPP's history, that they will use this opportunity of this more recent serious aggression by Venezuela, sending their gunboats in our territorial waters, threatening our foreign investors in the oil sector, destabilizing probably the most important economic sector in the country. The PPP would not see that as a national threat that requires genuine national unity. Their reflexes are politically opportunistic. They will believe that, look, they could play this thing out between now and the elections, so they don't need to shift their position, because in their calculation, if they have to shift their position to more cohesive national response, it undermines the years of political domination approach that they were doing to build up to these elections. And they will interpret this situation in a very partisan way. They rather risk the country's security, at the expense of them returning to power. So I don't think that, in this present period, that you could expect anything patriotic from the PPP in this election year.
Anything patriotic from the PPP in this election year? Let me read another excerpt from the press release and get your comments afterwards. The WPA also calls on the government to begin a recruitment drive to expand the size of the Guyana Defense Force. We also urge the beefing up of the People's Militia as a supplement to the GDF. Critically, WPA calls for an increase in defense spending aimed at modernizing the capability of our force. WPA views these suggestions not as a defense, WPA views these suggestions more as a defense mechanism rather than preparation for war. We continue to stand for a peaceful resolution to the problem. Brother Ogun, this issue of Venezuela has been there throughout the tenure of the PPP, minus 5 years. So from 1992 to the present is 33 years. Take away 5 for the coalition, 28 years. So they've been in power most of this time. There is the Venezuela threat. They have never put resources into beefing up the capability of the army. Even when it's clear that at a minimum, we need to defend our borders. And to do so, we have to have the kind of military capability. I mean, it was insulting to see gangs come over into our waters, shoot at our soldiers, you know? I mean, this is our standing army. But there is a subtext, Brother Ogunseye, as you know very well, and I want you to talk about that subtext. The real reason that the PPP has not been expending resources on the army, they were forced to reactivate the People's Militia, but they haven't been putting resources into beefing up the People's Militia, because there is a subtext here about who is in the army, who are in the army, who are in the People's Militia, and that if you arm the army and the People's Militia to deal with external forces, that there may be some internal consequences. And so even with oil, and plenty money with oil, the government is spending more on infrastructure than on defending 2/3 of our territory. I mean, it's bizarre that they are prepared to turn their eyes on another country wanting 2/3 of our territory, not spending money there, but spending money on infrastructure. Talk to us about the subtext.
Well, you explained it very kind of very clear. The PPP have always seen the army as an African institution that has to be controlled and has to be weakened, and so that is basically their fundamental position. They judge these institutions not necessarily on its important role in the national shape of things, but how it plays out in the internal politics of the country. And they see the army as a black institution, and therefore, they have always took the position that to the extent that they can't get Indians in the army, then they have to keep the army, at an insignificant number, and they have to keep the army prepared in a military sense. And they don't care about the border. For them, they measure these things in terms of the domestic impact and how that impact their survival as a political group and a political class. So for them, they will take the position that, look, we won't get to a point of war, and even if we get to a point of war, they will take the position we can't defend ourselves militarily. We have to depend upon Uncle Sam, and what we got to do is to depend upon the Americans, give the Americans whatever they want in exchange for some defense. And since for them, that is the way they see it, they will argue that spending on the army is neither here nor there. Because at the end of the day, they will claim the army is not capable of defending the country anyhow. So I think that is how they justify um, their actions. But it's being driven more by domestic considerations. They want a weak army because a weak army means, okay, a depleting of African political standing in the country. A strong army and a professional army, an army with some capacity, they see it as enhancing African political standing. So I think those are the realistic judgments they're making. They start from a position that, look, a black army is counter to Indian interests. Even if it's important for national interest, it is not important for Indian interests. It's not important for the PPP line of march of domination. Therefore, it, like the public sector, okay, or like any other agency or institutions where Africans have a dominance, you have to restrict it, okay, to a point of insignificance. And you try to compensate for that, and to be more particular in terms of this particular case, by reliance upon external forces to defend, and to keep the Venezuelans at bay. So for them, they are not prepared. You see, our call for expanding the army, they will not respond to that more so election year, because to expand the army, they're not going to want to bring in more Africans exclusively. Even if they could get them the Africans to join, they're not going to want to do that. Expanding the army must mean bringing in more Indians in the army, and the PPP is not going to carry that message in the election year to the Indian community. So, while objectively we need to strengthen the army, okay, even if for symbolic reasons, we need to do it as a nation to show our determination. But they're not going to move in this direction more so in the election year, because they will actually have to make concrete steps to get more Indians into the army. And at this election year, and with danger at the border, they're not going to invest into that politically. They're not going to move in that direction. They're going to invest in the international work, giving the Americans whatever the Americans want. And Trump is a transactional man, and Trump, I guess, is ready to make a deal. The question is whether the deal that Trump may ask is whether we could swallow, we could drink the medicine, But I think that is the approach. No.
Brother Ogunseye, are you true?
Yes, I'm true.
Yes. You heard it here on Politics 101, as we are going to say it blank here. We are facing a threat to 2/3 of our territory. Yet we have an army that is just a couple thousand in a country in which a lot of young people are underutilized. We keep a small army. Those who are in the army, we don't pay them well. 2. 3, we have refused, even with oil money, to give the army the kind of hardware, the kind of weaponry that they need. This is in the face of a threat to 2/3 of our territory. And as Brother Ogunseye says, that you may think that is bizarre. How can a government, faced with what we are facing from Venezuela? I mean, Venezuelan army is the size of our population and more. In the face of such a threat, every day, not beefing up the army, not beefing up the people's militia, not spending money on modern weaponry, not paying the army members a better wage, then of course there is a backstory to that. And the backstory to that is that this government does not want a critical mass of African people bearing arms. You heard it here on Politics 101. You heard it from the Working People's Alliance, because again, we are the ones who will speak that bluntly. Tomorrow they're going to say, Heinz and Ogunseye put race in everything. 98% of the army is black. We didn't put them there. The fact is that they're not paid a living wage. The fact is that they don't have the kind of weaponry that they need. If they had, no gang could have come across and shoot our boys in the way. And you see who gets shoot? It's black boys, young black boys. So we are not lying. We are not bringing race into it. It is a type of society that we live in. And we can't discuss the army outside of race. Our position is that we feel there needs to be affirmative action in the army, that Indians and Amerindians and Portuguese need to go into the army. They need to go into the army and help to develop this country. You can't be making money, and the people who have to protect your money, the police, are black. The people who have to protect the country so that the Venezuelans don't come in and take away your assets are black. And they are the ones that you are pushing to the back of the bus. So our position is now very clear. There must be affirmative action in the army, and that Indians and Amerindians and Portuguese and Chinese, they need to go into the army and help to defend this country. It must not be left to Africans alone to defend Guyana. We Africans are not the ones who own the assets in Guyana. The assets in Guyana are owned either by foreigners or by the East Indian and Portuguese elites. So in a sense, Africans are protecting the wealth of others. And we are saying it here, that has to stop. We need a larger standing army. We are not going to defeat the Venezuelans, but at a minimum, we are going to be able to protect our borders and to prevent the Venezuelans from sending gangs. I'm sure those gangs that came in there didn't come in on their own. And at least we have to have an army that can keep gangs from coming into our waters and in our territory. At least, at a minimum, we have to have an army, as Brother Ogun said, even for symbolic reasons. And the fact that this PPP spends more money on infrastructure than on the institution that will defend that infrastructure says a million. If the Venezuelans were to come in, they will blow those roads, blow Amalia Ward, blow the gas to shore pipeline, blow all of that, and it's gone. It's gone. We have to depend on the Americans. And any country that puts its destiny largely, solely in the hands of outsiders, they're worse. It's worse than colonialism and slavery. And so we want to sound that bell here, that this government is practicing race politics in its treatment of the army and defense of our country. So we have put it out there. Although we are not confident that they would act on our suggestion, at least we put it out there. And one of the things that disappoints me about this country is the way in which certain things are not picked up by the traditional media. Social media, yes. But the traditional media doesn't pick up that kind of thing and run with it. And so, in a sense, they contribute to what the PPP is doing. Because the PPP can say, it's only Ogunseye and Hinge, and all you have to do is to banish them from politics. And you won't hear those things again. Brother Ogun, anything you would like to add?
I want to say that the African commitment to the defense of the country have never been questionable. It was never subject to question. From the time this border issue arose at the point of independence, you have had, I would say, overcommitment of Africans to defend the country. Whether we could actually defend it in a real military or not, that might be questionable. But our commitment to defend the country was never in question. And but today, I would not argue. I will have to be very careful. While I think generally that commitment holds, I sense there's a lot of holes emerging, given the way the PPP have behaved in the last almost quarter of a century. That Africans, are slowly arriving at a point that if the Indians are not prepared to defend the country, why should they defend the country? And these are very unfortunate developments, but these are the real situations. And I have no doubt that it is that kind of calculation that the Venezuelan leadership is working on. I think they understand very well, just like how we will understand that on the border thing, Venezuelan opposition and government may very well have a common position. They take it they know for granted the Guyana opposition and the government will have a common position on the border. But the real test is not what the leaders at the top do. It's whether at the bottom, among the masses, there is sufficient unity to give real meaning to what is happening at the top. And I think they have so much presence in Guyana. And I guess there's no question about the Venezuelan Secret Service operation in Guyana. But I think they understand very well that Guyana at this point in time, and given the election season, is in a bad place. That divisiveness and divisive politics, is going to be the dominant characteristic of what happens in this country next few months. Because the PPP would do nothing, as I said before, to change that reality. And the opposition will have no other option but to respond, in kind. And I think that is what the Venezuelans are calculating on. That they may very well be able to extract from this government some important political compromise even before the international court rule on the border issue. And I think those are some of the quiet thinking that might have been going on in Caracas, But at the end of the day, in all of this, is the people going to be sufferers? Those who have accumulated money in Guyana could always decide to walk away from Guyana, and when we reduce to less than a country, the government three-quarters of the country, what is left? The rulers could always walk away with the handsome cash and begin a new life elsewhere. It is the ordinary African Indian, Amerindian person who will have to stay and try to make do with what is the remaining of Guyana, and this is a very sad state of affairs.
You know, I once interviewed a Caribbean scholar, Professor Rex Nettleford, and he said the Indian, like the African before him, must become West Indian. And some of the Indians scholars didn't like that position from Professor Nettleford. And you have raised a very important point here. What is the Indian elite commitment to Guyana and the Caribbean? Do they have a commitment to Guyana and the Caribbean beyond a place where you come and you make money? All right? Remember, indentureship was a system meant for people to come make money and go back after 5 years. Unfortunately for those who came up with the scheme, the majority of the those who were brought as indentured laborers stayed. Some went to India and came back to Guyana. And we saw in recent times, Ravi Dev, for example, going to India and telling the Indian nationals, come to Guyana and make money. You have your people there, come and make money. And it occurred to a lot of us that this thing, that the Guyana, for the elite, I'm not talking about the Indian masses, because for all intents and purposes, they're not going back to India. But for the Indian elite, this is a place to make money and not a place to protect and defend. And so that thinking and that risk is there, that given the transactional nature of the president of the United States, and given the transactional nature of our own government, that they could give away part of Guyana's land. That's a real risk. You see? Because we do have a hyper-transactional government here. They're prepared to get into any kind of transaction to hold on to political power as a means of extracting wealth from this country. Your thoughts?
I think you're quite correct. I mean, and that is the real danger Guyana's face. Now, I would happy for the Indian comrades like Rafi Devon and others at this point come out and argue for Indians to go into the army. Come out and argue that Indian business families must begin to send their children in the military. Prove us wrong, because it is easy for them to deny when we say this is our assessment of where the Indian elite consciousness and interest is. They're going to say, how we know is racism. So I would say we are at a juncture where they must speak to this. We must raise these matters, and they must address them. They must address them. They must begin to argue a view that could disprove us, because they're arguing a view. The view that Rafi Devon is arguing is give the American a military base, end the story, and the Americans can protect you. The Americans could take a military base and decide that they protect you to the extent that you may need protection. So as a nation, we have to reach some common understanding of some of these important national issues, and particularly the sovereignty of the country and the border claim of Venezuela is so huge, that we can't treat it lightly. And I think we have to press the Indian community to open up a discussion among themselves in the public space to demonstrate what is the attitude, because at present, if you go by the PPP behavior, you go by Rafi, them logic, the Indians are looking bad. The Indian elite is looking bad. It is looking as an elite that's only concerned with raping the country economically. And I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. But they could only get the benefit of the doubt if they begin to publicly articulate positions, that will give the rest of the community some confidence that they have rise, to the moment, and that they're prepared to encourage the sons and daughters, to be preparing them, for the inevitable, if that becomes a reality.
Brother Tacuma Ogunseye here tonight. We're talking about the Venezuelan threat and how that is playing itself out within the context of our internal politics. Let's take a listen here. And then we'll talk on the other side.
Heritage is, the Indians really are late in the game of exactly what the blacks had to fight against, their marginalization. And remember, the Indians have themselves changed.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned cultural pluralism, and Guyana, and to a less extent Trinidad, are going through a period of serious self-examinations and difficulty.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about that and its significance and what the future holds in your view.
Well, you see, in fairness, I mean, what we have inherited is, the Indians really are late in the game of exactly what the blacks had to fight against, their marginalization. And remember, the Indians were brought in after emancipation, and they took the place of the Africans in that kind of society which is so stratified. Everybody wants to look down on somebody else. Mm-hmm. Well, time has caught up with us in that part of the Caribbean, because in majoritarian rule, so-called democratic elections and whatever, the majority count. And the Indians are, in Trinidad, a major minority, and in Guyana, an undoubted majority. So the question of power, because this is very important, power having been transferred to these outposts, the question as to who should control that power, how it should be distributed, is a factor of post-independence. And this is what you're seeing. Now they will have to work things out. And again, we are trying, but there's enough in terms of this creolization thing. For example, the Indian, no more than the person of African ancestry can, he must be a Creole. It must be a way. The Indian has to become West Indian in the way that the African became West Indian and the European became West Indian. And it will take time as well. When people have flexed their muscles enough, do enough shadow boxing, get a little tired, nobody quite wins, it will work itself. But this is all part and parcel of the thing of growing up, shaping a new society. And we're going to have a whooping cough and our chicken pox and our what have you, all of that, as long as the immune system doesn't become totally shattered. I think we will work through. Optimistic, yes. I have to be optimistic because we are all we have. And that old injunction of Marcus Garvey, who in 1937 said it to West Indians he met in Menelik Hall in Nova Scotia: emancipate yourself from mental slavery. Only you yourselves can do it. The interesting thing that Bob Marley, who's now credited with it, of course, Bob Marley read Marcus Garvey, and he transformed that into a powerful couplet. Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. And you see, it is we who have to do it, and that's what we are doing. And I think we should be given some space in which to do it. I go back to what I said, that as soon as people in Washington hear that a couple of guns are fired in West Kingston, a travel advisory comes out advising their citizens not to go, which of course had tremendous impact on our tourist industry. The truth of the matter is that this place is a gun place, and it won its independence by the gun, which we didn't, know. And I think things need to be put into perspective. And it is true that, of course, the media allow
one of the one of the one of the great moments of my life was doing that interview with Professor Rex Nettleford, someone who I looked up to and really wanted to meet and to interview. I remember it today as it was then when I did that interview 20 years ago. It was quite a moment for me. Brother Ogunseye, you heard Professor Rex Nettleford there on the question of the Indians, Indian Caribbean people, and the question of creolization, the question of becoming West Indian. Your thoughts?
I listened to the professor very carefully, and I, reflect upon the debate, because it's an old debate. I mean, I know we were engaged in that debate in Askria in the early 70s and even the late 60s. But it's problematic where what the professor says and his assessment, I think, will be borne out with time. But I don't know if it is our place to argue that Indian must become Creole West Indians. I think that is a choice that they got to make. And I want to be very careful with it in the context of Guyana and the sensitivities on these matters. You see, the Creole culture that we adopt is not necessarily a culture in our best interest. It is the best we could have done under the circumstances. But it's a culture that strips us of our fundamental African identity, an African worldview. And to ask another set of people who suffer colonialization to swallow up what we experience and become like us is a little tricky matter. But we will all have to concede that living in this space, the Caribbean, and suffering European enslavement, indenture, colonization, there's an objective reality that unites us, that make us neither African or Indian, in a certain way, culturally. We don't speak. I speak to you, I'm speaking to you the Indian tongue. The Indians don't speak to us in an Indian tongue, a European tongue. I speak to you in a European tongue, English. They speak to you in English. We force the Amerindians to do the same thing. The power of European domination, cultural domination of the superstructural arrangements in the place and the political arrangements. We are all prisoners of that logic. And out of that logic comes a people who could be considered Creole and using the best interpretation of the world. And I think that inevitably, to some extent, we all have become creolized to some extent. But I don't want to go as far to say that I have a problem with Indians who are trying to resist the creolization process, because as an African, I try to resist the creolization process, especially in the areas that are negative to our interests.
Yeah, and in fairness, Professor Nettleford, that's not what he was saying. He was not calling on them to. He's seeing creolized as the natural evolution of our people. I mean, yes, you and I may be speaking in English, but if we come off this thing, we'll be speaking in Creolese.
Yeah.
Which has really become our Caribbean mother tongue. So we are both African and Caribbean. And I think what Professor Nettleford is arguing is that certainly at the level of the intellectual elites, the Indian intellectual elites, they resist a creolization, a West Indianism, a Guyanesism, so to speak. And we see that play out in our Guyana, the lack of commitment to CARICOM, for example. All right? They never took us into the Jagan and the PPP never took us into the federation. He argued that Indians would become a minority. They never supported Carifta and CARICOM. They always saw it as an African boys club. When in the 1990s, Pandey came to power in Trinidad in 1995, and there was an Indian government in Suriname, there was talk about Suriname, Guyana, and Trinidad and Tobago becoming a sub CARICOM movement that included three of them. So I think what Professor Ledford is arguing is that the logic of mixing, which is what the creolization is, the logic of mixing, which Africans and Amerindians and whites have had to go through, Indians are a little bit slow in that mixing, largely because when they came with their cultural reflexes intact. And so there's always been a resistance to a Caribbeanization of the Indian in a way that blacks and Amerindians have become Caribbeanized.
Yes, but the other side of it is that while they resist creolization, they suck up to European cultural forms.
Well, that's the point. So he wasn't talking about creolization in terms of Europeanization. Professor Ledford was talking creolization in terms of Caribbeanization, right? And that it goes to the point that we are making here tonight, and that is, are the elites, in the Indian elites, the Portuguese elites, and even the African elites, sections of the African elites, are those elites committed to Guyana as a place where we live and that we have transformed, we have quote unquote creolized, and we have turned it into a different, are they committed to it? Or is this just a place where you come, you make money? Because that's what slavery is about. Europeans come, they make money, so they didn't even come. Some of them never set foot in the Caribbean. They got lands, they got free labor from slavery, and they make buku money, as we would say, right? So slavery was about making money. Colonialism continued that whole notion that these places are outposts where you come, or you don't even have to physically come, but you make money. And are our elites, Indian elites, Portuguese elites, and to some extent sections of the African elites, are they continuing that trajectory of this place, Guyana, and by extension the wider Caribbean, as a place where you come and you transact and you make money, you accumulate wealth, and then you go somewhere else?
I think it's fair to say that is where they stand at this historical juncture. If you look how they train the children, they train them in the best colleges of the metropolitan countries. They watch where they store the bulk of the money. Guyana and the Caribbean are known, the indigenous classes in the Caribbean and Guyana, when they get their hands on any significant money, as a matter of policy, they keep 95% of their money or 90% of their money outside the country. And that clearly demonstrates that they see Guyana as a place to make money, and ultimately they see that their destiny, if push come to shove, lies with some place outside of Guyana. So I think that the ruling elite in the Caribbean and in Guyana have not become sufficiently creolized, and I have to borrow the term as we're using it,
yes,
to feel that they got a deep conviction to the place. They don't invest their money in any significant way domestically. And if a class of people or a group of people are to have a deep commitment to a place beyond hustling then the bulk of their livelihood and the existence has to be tied up with that place. And the external thing, cannot have the same importance as the local reality. And I don't think that our elites cross race in Guyana Caribbean have
The local
evolved to
reality, yes.
that thing.
And the term creolization is itself, you have. I think we're getting some difficulty there with Ogunseye. Yes, I was making the point, but Ogun, that the term creolization is itself not as straightforward as we think. There is European creolization, which is what you were getting at. And then there is African creolization. I see my Annandale Congo people, they call themselves Congo Creole.
Yeah.
Right? Congo Creole, which is a different Yes, which is a different kind of creolization from the European creolization. The Voodoo religion, for example, is really a creolization of all the different African religions coming together first, and then syncretizing with Catholicism and creating this new religion, this new African Creole religion called Voodoo. And the same thing with our faithism and spiritualism and so on and so forth. So there's African creolization, and then there's European creolization, and which Professor Nettleford is arguing. Brother Ogunseye, still no biometrics, still no voters list. GCOM is still holding form. What says the WP?
Well, I think the WPO holds firm to its position that protest is necessary in order to break this deadlock. But as we said in the statement, if we could avoid that by having a compromise or coming to some consensus on this matter, we will be open to it. But I'm very doubtful that the PPP is in any mood for compromise. They had indicated recently that they don't have a problem with biometrics, but when all the reports that we're getting out of GCOM from our representatives there is that they're fighting, like hell to ensure that there's no biometrics. So on the one hand, while the party may be trying to create in the public space that they're developing some amount of flexibility on the matter, they're digging the heels in where it matters at the Election Commission. And what I'm concerned about is my sense in the African community and in the wider opposition community. There is a increasing conviction that the opposition should not go to these elections without biometrics and a clean voter list. I'm sensing that we're going to have a real ding-dong struggle with our supporters to convince people otherwise. And I think it is important as the leadership of the opposition, we should allow ourselves to get to that point. We should we have to find the energies and the resources to put a major struggle for biometrics that involve bringing people in the streets, so that people will see that we're fighting tooth and nail with the government to get these necessary reforms. And my gut feelings is that it will be easier for the opposition to get their supporters to accept a high-level political risk of going to the elections without biometrics and without a voters list, if the people are mobilized and are engaged in a pre-election struggle for biometrics, people will more willing to accept, look, we did our best. We didn't win this thing, so we got to fall back on the next best situation. But my concern is that if the opposition allow itself to be maneuvered into the place where the PPP is moving them into, and the Rafidev and those who are, influencing the PPP's approach, that look, even without biometrics, without the clean voters list, elections are important and that we should participate in the elections. I think we will really be stretching our support base to swallow that medicine, So for me, and I think it is a feeling of the WPA, that we need a major struggle for biometrics and a new voter list that involve our supporters in a major way. And I think that if we do that, regardless of the outcome, I see it enhancing our position to get their participation at the highest levels in the elections. But I'm worried that no mobilization for biometrics and clean voters lists would make it almost very difficult for us to get the best out of our constituency. That is my real concern.
Real concern. Tacuma Ogunseye of the Working People's Alliance has been on with us tonight and weighing in on a number of issues. Tomorrow night, we're going to have GHK Lal on, and I want to thank a couple of people. I want to thank you, Bob, for your donation to Politics 101. Thank you. And there are a couple of people who sent in their donation via MMG. I think MMG is what you call it in Guyana. Yes, I've not been able to get your names from the MMG, but I have gotten donations. And those of you who have sent your donations by MMG, you know yourself. I'm not able to extract the names there. If you can, those who sent your donations via MMG, if you can inbox me your name so that I can thank you via your first name. I don't use both first and last names because I don't have permission to do that, and some people may want to remain anonymous. But if you send your donation by MMG, I'm not able to see names. So if you can inbox me on Facebook or text me at any of the numbers you see here at the bottom of the screen, and just let me know that you sent your donation via MMG, then I'll be able to thank you. So again, thank all of you who have made your contributions to Keep Politics 101. As I said today, Hugh Bob, thank you for your donation. Brother Ogunseye, your closing thoughts.
Yeah, I want to thank your viewers for their steadfastness and their commitment to the program. And I think that both ourselves and the viewers have been growing collectively in these exchanges, because a lot of the ideas that people project on the programs and the kind of things that they were sent to you and so forth helps to strengthen our collective resolve. And I think that we have to, as a people, those of us in Guyana and the diaspora, have to see this year as a major year, the year of change, one way or the other. And I think that that is the kind of message I want to leave with the viewers and by extension, the rest of the country, whenever our countrymen and women have a chance to hear the program, that this must be for us the year of change. And we have to do everything in our power before, during, and after the elections to make sure that we have change. And I'm being specific: before, during, and after. This is not a normal engagement that when the election's done, matters done. Regardless of the outcome, we have to struggle for change before, during, and after the elections.
Before, during, and after the elections. But Ogunseye, thank you very much, my brother. And to you, the audience, as usual, we love you and we continue to bat for you. We're all in this thing together. And so we've got to close ranks. Tomorrow night, Brother GHK Lal is going to be here. Until then, stay woke and stand firm.
When we speak of civil liberties and civil rights, people are beginning to understand that the most fundamental of these is the right to work in our society. And what is occurring in Guyana is that the government is making political capital out of the indefensible position of one who is either unemployed or is very close to the line of being unemployed.
I want to say to you all in no uncertain terms that this government is disrespectful to black people. And if people disrespect you, you have a right to disrespect them.
I am saying now that we have started, now that we have come together, do not sleep. Don't let us go back quietly into the night. Protest must be the order of the day.